Hi, today's a little bit of an impromptu video. Excuse me if it looks like I've escaped from a laundry basket. I would say I hadn't had time to iron my t-shirts. I generally don't iron them, but this one looks particularly crinkled, but hey, here we go. And it's about the subject that's quite a sensitive subject, and it's quite a tricky subject, which is humour and childhood trauma. And the title of the video is What's So Funny About Childhood Trauma? Now you could say, well, there's nothing funny about childhood trauma in the same way there's nothing funny about cancer, that it's just a very serious, somber and challenging subject. And to all intents and purposes, I would agree that this channel that I have about advice and support for childhood trauma, as you've noticed, is not a comedy channel. It's not there. I'm not making jokes and satire about it. But at the same time, you may have noticed, if you've watched a few of the videos, that I do try sprinkle a little bit of humor, a little bit of lightness, a little bit of playfulness in the videos, because I do really believe that humor and childhood trauma have a relationship. In my personal experience, and that may not be the case for everyone, but it definitely is for me. Because the thing with childhood trauma is it gifts us lots of things, you know, that the shame that I've been through, the toxic shame that I've experienced, you could say, look, it's gifted me the act of self-love. You know, my addictions has gifted me my understanding of my own resilience and capacity to get over hardships. You know, so there's a lot of things that I can look at and experience that the trauma has made me more empathetic to other people's pain because of my own experiences. But when you look at them as gifts in inverted commas, they're the kind of, you know, I'm going to gift you these bunch of sour lemons, and through this process of transformation, you can turn these lemons into lemonade. I mean, they're not really bouquet of flower gifts where they're just gifts in of themselves. They're these kind of gifts where to make them a gift, you have to turn the lead into gold, and you have to turn something kind of essentially crappy into something meaningful. But it's hard work. And if you're not able to do that, you're just left with the piece of poo that you've been given, independent of what you can transform it into. And so they are kind of gifts, I guess. That's a sort of a positive way to look at it, but they're also just difficult things. And the truth is, if you've grown up in a happy, healthy, loving home, great. And the reality is life is challenging and difficult and arduous, even if you've had all that. So why, people who survivors of childhood trauma just have to have all the normal things everyone has to deal with another deeper layer of stuff to deal with. So ideally, I don't want to put my kids through that. And why would you want that? But at the same time, there is some parts of childhood trauma that have gifted me things directly, and humor would be one of them. I don't know if maybe it's really the only one. I heard a comedian once say that I want to traumatize my kids enough that they have a sense of humor, but not enough where they end up in therapy. Now, I don't know whether that's possible. I doubt it. I mean, where do you draw that line? But I get his kind of joke, and his joke was that there is something about difficulty that creates and fosters a sense of humor and a sense of wittiness and a sense of perspective, that maybe having things easier is not as necessary. Now, it's definitely the case that there are very funny people and comedians and writers that have had good childhoods. So it's not like you cannot be funny and you cannot have a good sense of humor unless you've had this really terrible childhood. But there does seem to be some kind of anecdotal or basic understanding that there are a lot of stand-up comedians that have had a lot of difficulty. There's a lot of very funny people that have come from very difficult paths. And there's even a lot of research, academic research, that look at the nature of trauma, resilience, and humor. And I can say in my experience growing up that developing a sense of humor, I wouldn't say having one because it's not necessarily something you're kind of born with, but developing a sense of humor was a very important tool to get through very difficult times. I have 3 brothers, and growing up in an environment that was very tense and very stressful and at times very traumatic, our humor between ourselves and my humor between my friends was something that really did get me through. And not only did it get me through, but it's carried itself all the way through. I've kept that humor, and it's something that I really, really value. When I look at all my close friendships, one common denominator in all my really close friends is our humor. We share a humour, that whatever banter and back and forth we have, it's always laced somewhere in the mix of it with some kind of humour. It's like this kind of glue that keeps a lot of my friendships kind of together. And there's seriousness in that, there's depth, there's sincerity, but there's this kind of mix of humour that I really value and I really enjoy. And I think it's just one of the great things about being human is our ability to laugh at ourselves and the world. And I know as a child, having that humour really it took attention out of the absurdity and unpredictability and just stress of the environment I grew up in. There was a holiday we were on once, and my dad was pissed off about something. I can't remember what it was. And we were staying in this kind of holiday apartment. And he was like, I'm going to throw you off the fucking balcony. Something along those lines. But when we got back home, for whatever reason, it became his like catchphrase. Wherever he'd get angry or annoyed or threatening, he would say, I'm going to throw you off the fucking balcony. And the thing is, we lived in a house with no stairs. It was just a ground floor house. We had no balcony. There wasn't even really a porch. It was just this ground level house, yet he kept repeating it. So between me and my brothers, we would have this kind of look on our face, this kind of concealed smirk, where he would shout it, and just with this very subtle eye contact, we'd be like, the balcony. And it was this means and mechanism, when I look back, just intuitively, that took the tension out of the air. That there's this tension and aggression and stress, and just a joke, even if it's an unspoken joke, even if it's just a look between us, that was able to kind of take the gravity of that out and just shift it and make it more manageable and make it more, just more easy to handle. And then what happened over the years, when I look back, our humor was also our own language. It took power back. That there was a joke that we were in on that my dad wasn't in on. And there was a joke with my friends, not in a humiliating way or a demeaning way, but our humor gave us this language and this ability to communicate outside of that framework, where we had our own understanding of things that we got that he didn't. And my brother, Gavin, always had this great ability to mock my dad in this way that it's like my dad couldn't be too hard on him because it would look like he's petty, but at the same time as my brother's way of just letting him know, I don't take you seriously and I have a problem with you, without kind of having to kind of directly confront him. So our humor was both a sort of a shield and a sword in an environment where we had very little to no power. And as I've progressed as an adult, my appreciation of humor, my understanding of humor has been something that has just really carried me through. Now, there is an element at times where I've had to realize not everything, sometimes there just isn't a place for humor. And as I've matured as an adult, I guess I've learned, or I've tried to learn a little bit at times, that making a joke about this is a form of deflection or defense, or it's maybe also a form of avoidance. It can be a way of attention seeking, where you're always being the clown, trying to get a little bit of validation. So, there are distortions of the humor, and there are aspects where that can be a little bit unhealthy. But by and large, as I've matured and as I've kind of learned to discern a little bit better, when I live in Spain, at times I'll make a joke and my wife will say, look, in Spain, that's just not funny. Like, that's not the way people, like what you think is funny is just not funny. So, there are cultural adjustments as well. And I have humor with some of my friends that maybe you could say it's a little bit dark or it's a little bit odd, that I wouldn't share publicly because it's only a thing that we get amongst each other. So there is that discernment process. But by and large, my humor has been a gift, and not a lemons to lemonade gift, just straight lemonade. It's just been something that I really appreciate, that if, my stressful childhood gave me this humor and gave me this perspective, I am grateful straight up for that. Because the reality is, we live in a very absurd world. There are just things that do not make sense, that are not fair, that are unjust. And there are times where we need to feel rage against it, or we need to feel the passion of their injustice. But there are other times where you just need to not take it too seriously, that you need to be able to just see the funny side of things, as absurd as it is. Because if you don't, you don't get that valve, there isn't that release. It just builds up and it builds up and it builds up. And humor is that, the letting the air out of the tension. It just creates this playfulness on one level, that we can see the humor in the sadness of life. We can see the humor in the tragedy of life. And this is why Shakespeare and the classic Greeks had this understanding of tragedy and comedy all kind of being mixed together. And, for me, I would I guess I'm just sharing with you that I think it's really important to keep a sense of humor, keep a sense of playfulness. It helps keep things in perspective. I think next to dolphins, we're the only mammals that have a sense of humor in that regard. So it's very unique to our humanity, is our humor. It joins us when you see people laughing. It's common. Even in Spain at times, there are things I've witnessed, and I've looked at someone, they've looked at me, and there's been this kind of unspoken humor and understanding of things, even that it cuts across all language and cultural barriers. So to me, humor is a great gift in my life. I think it's a great gift for humanity. I think it's something that helps give us perspective. And, it's something I can celebrate, that it's something I can directly say, you know what, I'm glad for whatever's gone on in my life. I'm glad I've been given the gift of humor. So look, enjoy this, take care, and look after yourself. Bye-bye.